The SMU Mustangs, the ACC runner-ups, travel to the Penn State Nittany Lions, who are 9-point favorites. And this game will take place on Saturday, December 21st at noon Eastern Time. Penn State, by the way, has declared this game as a whiteout, so yes, it will kick off at noon. But I have no doubt, with it being a home playoff game and Penn State fans and faithful knowing all that is on the line, that it will be loud, it will be rambunctious, and it will have a whiteout feel. What I'm interested to see in this game is how the weather affects SMU, how these rushing offenses and defenses perform against each other, and how these two coaches, who are offensive-minded in James Franklin and Rhett Lashlee, perform in a big spot. SMU has had a weak strength of schedule all season long. Penn State has a tougher schedule that they have faced, of course, but still, they're 0-2 against the only teams they've played all year that are inside of the top 10. More specifically, I would say the top 5. I think Ohio State is a top 5 team. I think Oregon right now is the best team in all of college football. They're 0-2 against those teams. SMU, well, they lost to BYU and they lost to Clemson. And those are the best teams that they have played all season long. So who wins the big game here? And a huge part of that is going to take place in the trenches, where both of these teams have strengths on their offensive lines and defensive lines, and both have good running backs. So let's really dive in here and talk about the strengths for both of these teams. For SMU, it's their rush defense, which has been impressive for much of the year, and their defensive line to go on top of that. When you look at the Mustangs and what they have done, a huge part of the reason why they are winning games is because of their defense. Their offense has been performing at a high level, by the way. They're top 10 in scoring offense, scoring 36.8 points per game. They are scoring 0.524 points per play, but their points per play margin is not too far behind. It's 11th with a 0.23 points per play margin. That's because their defense has been strong. Is it elite? No, but they're 28th in opponent points per game, allowing only 22. They're 17th in opponent points per play, allowing 0.295. They only allow on the year 3.3 red zone scoring attempts per game, which is 63rd. But they're 13th in opponent red zone scoring percentage, only allowing opponents to score 75% of the time in the red zone, so 3 out of every 4 trips inside of the red zone. And a huge part of that is they limit you to short plays, only allow opponents to average 4.6 yards per play, which is 10th, only slightly behind Penn State's defense, who allows opponents to average 4.5 yards per play, 8th. And they're 3rd in opponent yards per carry, only allowing opponents to average 2.8 yards on the ground. And you don't even have to adjust that for sacks all that much, because they only have a 7.72 defensive sack percentage, which is 31st. They only allow 98.3 rushing yards per game, which is 8th, 5.9 rushing first downs per game, which is 8th. And opponents like to run the ball on SMU. They average 34.8 rushing attempts. SMU's opponents do per game, which is 53rd. And SMU's defense does have a problem with opponent plays per game. Opponents average 74.7 plays per game on SMU, which is 125th, and yet they put up these numbers. It's literally the definition of bend but don't break defense. But what helps is they're strong on the defensive line. They limit you in running the football, and they're strong and they're physical up there on the defensive front. SMU is a very impressive team. It was a hard decision between them and Alabama as to who would get in the playoff. I thought that a team like South Carolina, for example, deserved to get in more than Alabama, because South Carolina did have better losses and they looked better at the end of the season. But the college football playoff system is broken, and I think at the end of the day, SMU did better with their schedule than a team like Alabama did. And I'm not, this video obviously isn't me discussing playoff scenarios or what should be. I'm just kind of making arguments for both. SMU does not have a very good resume, that's for sure. They've played a very weak schedule. Other teams who were left out played harder schedules. But SMU also lost to a 10-win BYU and a 10-win Clemson team, who is a champion and is talented. So looking at the Mustangs, Elijah Roberts, Anthony Booker Jr., Jared Harrison Hunte, and Jafari Harvey. Those are players to look out for on the defensive line. You look at Penn State, their strength is tight end with Tyler Warren, and I would say beyond that, the defensive line and the offensive line as well. But I just really wanted to mention the defensive line because I think Penn State's defensive line is very talented, especially in run defense, but also in getting to the quarterback with Abdul Carter and then Zane Durant, Dennis Sutton. You look at Devon J. Thomas and some of the backups too at the defensive tackle room like Alonzo Ford Jr., Keziah Izzard, Amin Vanover at defensive end. They're very deep on the defensive line, and they're very talented up front as well. Penn State this season, they only allow in opponents running the football 3.3 yards per carry, 13th, 103.8 rushing yards per game, 11th. Opponents run the ball for about 31.9 attempts per game on Penn State, which is 19th. And Penn State allows opponents to gain 7.1 rushing first downs per game, 27th. Penn State, they do a good job of getting interior pressure. They let their presence get known on the defensive line, where they just feast with tackles for loss, do a good job of getting sacks. And you look at their defensive line, or their offensive line rather, they're averaging 5.3 yards per carry, which is 15th, 202 rushing yards per game, which is 16th. They like to run the football. They love to be physical. This is a physical team in Penn State. Their rushing offense, I think, is a huge strength of theirs. I think it's stronger than their rush defense, pass defense, or pass offense. So Penn State really has a lot of key strengths everywhere. Positionally, it's tight end with Tyler Warren, who has over 1,000 all-purpose yards and over 10 total touchdowns. As a unit, their defensive line, I think, is one of the strongest units in the country and on their roster. But their functionality in rushing offense is special, and we've seen that in games where maybe they're facing adversity in other areas, but their rushing offense is staying consistent. Or like against Oregon, where at one point they were averaging close to 10 yards per carry and were just 3 or 4 yards short of 300 rushing yards. Their weaknesses for these teams, for SMU, it's their offensive line, it's their cornerback room, and overall their rushing offense. Now, SMU's offensive line, I think, nationally is still a good unit. Savion Bard, Logan Parr, Ja'Kai Clark, Justin Osborne, P.J. Williams. They do make up a good starting group on the offensive line, and they do have some depth and experience there. SMU is a talented team, and Brashard Smith is a great running back, and Kevin Jennings, I think, is a good quarterback. This is a good offense, but you look at their rushing offense this season, and they are only averaging 4.2 yards per carry, 70th, 160 rushing yards per game, 69th, and they're, trying to run the football, 37.7 average rushing attempts per game, and it's just not consistently working. Their offensive line does a good job in protecting the QB. They only allow a 3.84 sack percentage, which is 23rd, and 1.3 sacks per game, which is also 23rd. So the offensive line isn't bad. It's just a weakness on the team. And then you look at corner, and it's a similar story. SMU in defending the pass is respectable. They're respected, but they're not great. They allow 6.6 opponent yards per pass attempt, 34th, and 11.5 opponent yards per completion, which is 47th. Opponents complete 57.24% of their pass attempts, which is an area SMU's good in, but if you can complete the football, you will gain yards on these guys, and they're not exactly a fantastic in terms of sack percentage. They get a lot of sacks per game, 3.1 per game, but teams pass on them for about 37 attempts per game. So once you factor in sacks per attempt, their sack rate is outside of the top 25. For Penn State, it's their wide receivers, and it's their special teams, and it's James Franklin. Penn State, you wouldn't know it exactly by their statistics, where the Nittany Lions this season have been averaging 8.8 yards per pass attempt, 9th, and 12.7 yards per completion, 39th. Their average team passer rating is top 10. Their passing yards per game is 41st, and their completion percentage is nearly 70%. But if you watch the games and you look at box scores and you observe what they've done in big games, you'll see that Harrison Walls III, Amari Evans, Julian Fleming, and Liam Clifford, they're good players, or at least average players. I think Harrison Walls III is even a great player, but they don't have a lot of depth there. It's a lot like SMU's cornerback room or offensive line, where it's good, but against better opponents, it can be a liability and something that can be taken out of the game. And you look at special teams for the Nittany Lions, their punting has been inconsistent this year. Their kicker, Ryan Barker, who was initially the second stringer, but they brought in after the original starter, struggled. He's been doing well, but he's not an elite kicker, and that combined with some of the struggles in the punting department have not been helpful. Penn State's average starting field position is pretty poor. And James Franklin is 1-14 against AP top 5 opponents. His last win against a top 5 team, and SMU's not a top 5 team by power ratings or rankings. Last win against a top 5 team was Ohio State in 2016. His last win against a top 10 team came against Utah in the Rose Bowl in the 2022 postseason. Before that, I don't know when it came. Before that, beat Utah, and then I think in another postseason bowl game, he beat a top 10 team. I want to say maybe 2017 against Washington, 2019 against Memphis. Oh no, it was Wisconsin in 2016. It came to me. He struggles against top 10 competition, against teams that have close to his team's talent or similar or especially better, and teams that are well coached. I mean, James Franklin in big games is a liability. So those are things to pay attention to for both of these teams. I think that a critical matchup to pay attention to, one where I'm fascinated to see the battle and the dance of the coaches, is SMU's offensive coordinator and his quarterback, his offensive line, his tight end, and his wide receiver. How do they do in passing the football against Penn State's defense? This is a Penn State defense who is stronger at defending the run than defending the pass. The Oregon game was the epitome of that. And it's also an SMU offense who is much better at passing the football than running the football. So how is that going to work? You're on the road. You're facing Abdul Carter, Deni Dennis Sutton, great linebackers, a great defense overall, and you have some players in the passing game who can make plays, and you have an offensive line who can do an all right job, a good job at protecting you. So how does Casey Woods handle the environment? What plays does he call? How does he line up against a Tom Allen defense that has elite players, but as we have seen against the better teams, can be got? So how do Brashard Smith, the offensive line, SMU's quarterback Kevin Jennings, and Jordan Hudson, Jake Bailey, and Moochie Dixon, how do they match up against Penn State? And looking at, Abdul Carter, and then at linebacker, Tony Roas and Kobe King, and corner A.J. Harris, do they target Jalen Kimber, who's been somewhat of a liability in the secondary? How do Zakee Wheatley, Jalen Reed, and Cam Miller do at the safety and the lion positions for Penn State's defense? That's a matchup that I am fascinated by, is SMU's passing offense against this Penn State defense, because there probably isn't a world where SMU is doing a very good job at running the football but can't also pass the football. If SMU can't pass the football, Penn State could win in a shutout. If SMU can pass the football and do it rather well, that's where you're going to see opportunities for Brashard Smith consistently appear in the ground game. And that's where Penn State's biggest weakness is. To go back to SMU's passing offense, it's their passing defense. That's an area where they have some weaknesses and where they have some holes that I think they're going to look to fill in the 2025 preseason after this is all said and done, the college football playoff. Another matchup is SMU's defense, but really their rushing defense against Penn State's downfield blockers and their running backs, Nicholas Singleton, Katron Allen, and whether it's Drew Aller, Bo Pribula, or Tyler Warren at the quarterback position. How does SMU do at containing this rushing offense, which is peaking right now? This offensive line stepped up after the injury to Anthony Dunco, who was previously their best run blocker. And Nick Dawkins, Olivega Ione, Drew Shelton, Sal Wormley, Anthony Dunco, J.B. Nelson, they have a deep, physical offensive line. Tyler Warren is a physical tight end, good blocker, good receiver, wildcat weapon. He's a Swiss Army knife. Aller is more mobile than he was last year. Pribula is extremely mobile. And Nicholas Singleton and Katron Allen do have a burst element to them and a power element as well, to where if they have good blocking, they can be gone, and they can pick up huge chunk plays, and they don't give up. They persevere. But SMU's rushing defense, as we have seen, is physical. They will bully you, and they will impose their will on you. Elijah Roberts, Anthony Booker Jr., Jared Harrison Hunte, Jafari Harvey, Kobe Wilson, Ahmad Walker. They have good linebackers. They have a good defensive line. And Penn State's rushing offense, it's awesome. I'd say it's at minimum near elite, could be elite, but it's not quite Notre Dame's. And against Ohio State, they struggled mightily. And in some other games too, like against Minnesota, they were God on the ground. So this is another matchup where if Penn State can impose their will on the ground and run all over SMU, then even if SMU's offense has some success, can they really overcome that edge for Penn State, the home field advantage, the crowd always being in it? After all, they're 9-point underdogs. They're not double-digit underdogs, but they're 2-score underdogs per Vegas. And if SMU can shut down Penn State's rushing offense, then that can give their offense some time to figure out this Penn State defense and to quickly make adjustments, because Penn State's defense, it starts off games rough, typically. You look at the analytics here, and Penn State's first quarter defense is 50th. They allow 4.8 opponent first quarter points per game, and they allow 6.3 opponent second quarter points per game. They're outside the top 25 in both of those, but they're top 10 in opponent third quarter points per game and fourth quarter points per game. Penn State's defense gets better as the game goes on. So SMU's offense and Casey Woods, their offensive coordinator, they're always going to need to adapt and change things up and find new weaknesses. And if Penn State's rushing offense is high-flying and can do what it wants to do on the ground, well, SMU won't have the amount of drives and opportunities necessary to really push this defense and come out with a win. So those are the important matchups here. I'm excited to watch this game at noon. Not this coming Saturday, but the Saturday after that, December 20th. It's an exciting game. You got two teams who have not won a big game all season long, and this is their game to prove it. And then they have Boise State in the Fiesta Bowl in the next round, depending on who wins this matchup. Thank you so much for watching. Remember to like the video and subscribe to the channel, and also hit that notification bell so that way you can get notified when new content from College Football with Sam drops. I appreciate you very much, and also share the video around to others who you know enjoy the sport of college football and love it as I do and as you do, and comment your thoughts down below so that we can have a conversation, because I want to know what you are thinking. And join our Discord server where we talk college football 24/7 via the link in the description or down below in the pinned comment. Thank you to my Heisman Patreon members, Crash2488, Brascal Rascal, and Kylo OH. Thank you to my All-American Patreon members, Chris Lane, Ismar, and Tyler Nye. And thank you to my All-Conference members, John Lynn, Roaming Gnome, Matthew Sale, Austin Christmas, Joshua Jorgensen, and Will Loftus. Make sure to check out my merchandise store and or Patreon page, or super chat down in the comment section below to support the channel. The Patreon page and merchandise store links are in the description or down below in the pinned comment. I hope you have a wonderful day. It is December, so Merry Christmas and also Happy New Year. I will see you guys soon.